In the US, the subject of someone's personal income is always touchy. We think of it as off limits. With that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and explain how it works in real estate just so you don't have to ask. Here goes. The short answer is that almost all real estate agents make a commission when either their buyer client or seller client closes a transaction. So if that's enough of an answer for you, then go ahead and close this window because the rest of this video just gives some background, context, and some examples. My name is allen-rouman and I'm a real estate agent in beautiful Palm Springs, California. This question around how real estate agents are paid usually comes up in the context of, why is the real estate commission so much? So to answer that, let's look at the alternatives. For starters, we should be clear that real estate agents and brokers provide a valuable service. After all, we're not the ones with the property to sell. Rather, we work for buyers and for sellers. So in some ways, we're no different from, say, an electrician or a plumber. We do something for you, and then you pay us for it. However, unlike many service providers, you can't really standardize how long buying and selling property takes, so finding a reasonable hourly rate is nearly impossible. Or from our side of it, what hourly rate would we charge that covers our cost of doing business while also enabling us to make a profit? I mean, we are in business after all. I suppose we could look to attorneys for some idea, as they seem to have arrived at a dual fee structure. In one model, you get charged a high hourly rate, and in exchange, he or she does something specific for you. Typically, you're either proactively pursuing a goal, like let's say filing patent papers, or defending yourself in a lawsuit. Ick. All of that is open-ended, but at least in theory, your engagement of legal services will achieve some particular aim. In the other model, if you are in a position to receive a large settlement of some kind, well, you guessed it, they take a percentage, which is sometimes as much as a third, or, as we would see it, a 33% commission. All right, enough about lawyers for now. Let's think about how an hourly rate might work in real estate. If you decided you'd like to sell your house, you hire an agent on a time and materials basis. Before the property hits the open market, your agent researches recent sales, visits similar houses for sale, recommends an asking price, has the house photographed, writes a compelling description, produces literature, enters everything into the multiple listing service, holds open houses, and ideally helps you negotiate the best possible deal if a buyer comes along. And in that scenario, because you've sold your house, you've got some money to pay your agent's time and materials bill. But what if the house doesn't sell and you decide to take it off the market? How much money have you spent in this fruitless exercise? I mean, it happens. You sometimes list your house and it doesn't sell, or you change your mind, or that new job in another city falls through. Well, you get the idea. If we used an hourly rate like an attorney's, we're talking about several $1,000s. And moreover, at what point would the pressure of mounting real estate charges influence your decision to lower your price and sell the property rather than returning it to market later when the timing is better for you? Remember, in a time and materials arrangement, you're going to have many of the same fees all over again when you relist the property. Or let's say you're a buyer and you hire an agent on an hourly basis to find you a home. After spending months in your pursuit, nothing, and I mean nothing, meets your needs. But now you've invested a lot of money in bills from your agent, who has worked diligently to find you a place by researching homes, scouting brokers' open houses, driving you around to properties, and maybe even writing a few unsuccessful offers. Let me ask you, do you compromise and settle for a home you don't really want as a way of avoiding more hourly bills from your agent? Ask anyone who's been in a lawsuit and see if they've ultimately settled because of the mounting legal bills, despite being the victim in the case. Double ick. Now, do you see how paying a real estate agent on an hourly basis doesn't work really well? I mean, you can do it, but really. So that takes us to the idea of a commission paid only when the transaction between parties closes. Now, before I continue to talk about commissions and how they're often structured, I need to say two things. First, some agents do work on an hourly and/or flat fee basis. If that's important to you, ask around, or if your real estate needs are that specific, find an attorney that practices real estate law in your area. As we've established, attorneys are familiar with charging hourly rates and in most states can engage in the practice of real estate directly. And second, commission rates are not standardized and are completely negotiable with an individual brokerage. I want to emphasize that. It's against California law for us to present real estate commissions as fixed or standard or established. They are not. An individual broker may choose to have a minimum commission rate, but that's up to them. And it shouldn't be generalized to mean that all brokers in an area charge that minimum. If you hear an agent saying commission rates are standard, do me a favor and call his or her managing broker, or even better, report them to the California Bureau of Real Estate. All right, we're moving on. Commissions are the norm. So how's that work? First of all, there are two parties to a transaction, the buyer and the seller. In 999.9 cases out of 1,000, and yes, I'm making that statistic up to drive home a point, the seller has a formal written agreement with their broker to represent them in the presentation of their property. Included in that agreement is language stipulating what that broker will charge for their services. Again, brokers establish what their fee is to represent a seller, and it is typically expressed as a percentage of the total sales price of the property. That's the commission. And it's calculated on the ultimate sales price, not the asking price, as the asking price may be higher or lower than the final sales price. No sale, no commission owed. Some brokerages have higher commission rates while others have lower commission rates. And some have a flat fee structure or some combination of the two. Investigating prevailing rates is part of the seller's responsibility when they go to hire someone to be their agent. Okay, let's keep going. Let's say you're the seller, and when you sign your listing agreement, there's a section that says you're going to pay your broker X% commission. Now, long before we had formal realtor associations and multiple listing services, homebuyers would go from broker to broker to see who had what houses for sale. When they found one, the listing broker would sell them the property and keep all the commission. But this practice didn't leave room for a buyer to bring their own agent to the table to help them negotiate a better deal. Why? Because homebuyers would have to hire and pay an agent for that service. As we discussed, that could get very expensive. But this also meant that if you were a broker with lots of buyers but no listings to show them, you were losing clients to other brokers. Likewise, if you had lots of listings but no buyers, you had lots of unhappy sellers. Okay, eventually brokers realized they could cooperate with one another. They said things like, okay, Mr. Buyer's agent from another brokerage, if you bring us a buyer, we'll give you some of the commission we're collecting from that seller, and that way, your buyer doesn't need to pay you. Great! Then the state of California stepped in and said, you can do that, but it has to be up to the seller, not the listing broker, to decide how much of the commission goes to the cooperating broker. This was done in part so brokers couldn't favor one broker or another or game the system in some other way. All right, that was a lot of information. I'm going to say it again a little differently. While the seller and his or her broker negotiates the total commission rate up front, they also negotiate how much of that commission the listing broker will share with any cooperating buyer's broker. So, if Arnie, agent from another brokerage, brings you, the seller, a buyer, your broker is going to give Arnie's broker some of the commission. With this in mind, the age-old question of who pays the agents can be answered. It's the seller. Now, we can argue all day long that if there were no commissions, then the buyer would pay less for the property, And since it's the buyer's money, then really they're paying the commission. No. We've already established that real estate agents provide a valuable service. If a seller doesn't need an agent because they do all the listing, marketing, and negotiating themselves, then they are still going to ask the market rate for their property. I mean, why would they leave money on the table? That doesn't make any sense. If anything, without an agent involved, the seller is doing more work himself or herself and would feel justified in asking for more money for their property. In other words, the work is still getting done. And in the end, when you look at the closing disclosure, the real estate broker fees are almost always taken from the seller's side of the ledger. Of course, since this is negotiable, like just about everything in real estate, then it's possible for a buyer to pay the brokerage fees, but that really is the exception. Now, let's get to the agent level of the transaction. Since most people deal with their agent and not their broker, the real question becomes how much of the commission in a transaction does the agent earn? Well, that depends on the particular agent's compensation structure with his or her broker, and it's not specified in the listing agreement. With the exception of one large national brokerage that I can think of, most agents are on what's called a split with their broker. In other words, when a broker collects a portion of the commission paid by the seller, he or she then splits that portion with their particular agent involved in the transaction. The seller's broker has a split with the listing agent, while the selling agent's broker has their own split with the buyer's broker. Now, what I just said may sound funny to some people, but it makes more sense if you watch my video about selling broker in a transaction. All right, back to splits. These splits generally fall into the range of 50-50, what's known as an even split, to as much as a 90-10 in favor of the agent. Now, there are some brokers that offer a 100% split, but then they turn around and charge the agent all sorts of fees, so it's not truly a 100% takeaway. Now, how all this plays out depends upon factors like the volume of business an agent does, to how new they are in the business, to how long they've been with that particular brokerage. And again, like just about everything in real estate, the individual agent and his or her broker negotiates their split. It's important to mention that most real estate agents are independent contractors and not employees of a broker. That means the individual agent must pay their own taxes, health insurance, car expenses, and so on. So just think of any commission as gross income, not all profit. Now, for anyone curious to know what my split is, well, I hope this explains how real estate agents get paid. If you have any comments or questions, please leave them in the section below and I'll do my best to answer them. Know that you can always write to me personally if you need real estate help. And if I can't assist you myself, I probably have someone in my network that can. Lastly, if you're looking for a real estate agent in Palm Springs or anywhere in the Coachella Valley, we're here to lend a hand. That's all for now. Thanks for watching.